Ladies and gentlemen, a very special opening gambit, the Muhiba drums, consisting of various ethnicities such as the Malay, Chinese, and the Indian drum bass. Once again, ladies and gentlemen, let's give them a big, big round of applause. Wishing a very good morning to Mr. Douglas Kress, the official representative of Mr. Achim Steiner, the Executive Director of the United Nations Environment Program, UNEP, Dr. David Suzuki, the co-founder of the David Suzuki Foundation, honorable representative from the various embassies and international organizations, respected members of the RSPO Board of Governors, esteemed members of RSPO, distinguished guests, members of the media, ladies and gentlemen, welcome and selamat datang to the 12th Annual Roundtable Meeting on Sustainable Palm Oil, or RT12, here at the Shangri-La Hotel, Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia. First and foremost, RSPO would like to express our utmost gratitude, realizing and grateful that all of you have come from far and near to be here with us despite your busy schedules. We hope your time here at RT12 will prove to be most beneficial, and likewise, we are sure your presence here will make a positive difference to our collective efforts. Ladies and gentlemen, I would now like to invite Mr. Biswanjaranjan Sen, the chairperson of RSPO, on stage to deliver his welcome address.
Good morning. Distinguished guests, members of the board, and ladies and gentlemen, a very warm welcome to all of you to this 12th roundtable. A lot has changed since we met last in Medan a year ago. The palm oil industry and the RSPO have made significant progress since then. I'm delighted to inform you that last year, 18% of the world's global production of palm oil was certified and sustainable. Production of CSPO has grown from about 500,000 tons in 2008 to 11 million tons in 2014. That's a big step forward and a massive achievement for all of us in this room. And yet, there's a lot more that needs to be done. The RSPO now has more than 1,900 members from more than 70 countries. And that is a testimony to the growing acknowledgement of RSPO's role in this industry. Over the course of the past year, several companies have made public commitments to raise the bar on palm oil. Consuming companies have made commitments to increase their sourcing of certified sustainable palm oil. And this has been reflected in a massive surge in demand in the first half of this year, when for the first time, we've seen the growth in demand outstrip the growth in supply. Similarly, several growers and traders have come out with commitments to address the deforestation issue and to conform to even higher standards. As my CEO termed it, it's a welcome race to the top. Smallholders play a very important role in the value chain of this industry, accounting for more than 30% of the total production of palm oil. I'm pleased to inform you that 145,000 smallholders today are globally certified, and about 300,000 hectares of certified area is used for oil palm production. In 2013, the RSPO set up a fund to help smallholders get access to certification and to help them implement sustainable agricultural practices. I'm pleased to inform you that in 2014, that fund has now grown to about just under $4 million. Smallholder development is a key area of focus for the RSPO, and going forward, we would like to work more and more with growers, with smallholders and governments to build certified supply sheds. Success, they say, is not measured just by the end state, but also by the progress that we make. And what keeps us energized and going is the fact that we do have a holistic plan, and we are making great progress against that. I want to use this opportunity today to speak to you about 3 C's. The first C is change, specifically about climate change. We live in a rapidly changing world confronted by ever-increasing challenges. The impact of human actions on climate is increasingly evident, be it the unusual dry spell that we saw in Southeast Asia last year, or the rains and floods in various other parts of the world. Climate change is a reality that is hard to deny or wish away. In fact, it seems extreme weather is the new norm. And it is possibly the biggest threat confronting mankind today. One of the key reasons for climate change is the increasing level of GHG emissions. Illegal deforestation accounts for just under 1/6 of the total GHG emissions, more than the vehicular emissions of this planet. If we keep going on with deforestation, our business models and indeed our collective society is at risk. On top of that, our consumers are saying, we do not want to buy products that have had anything to do with deforestation. While several players in the palm oil industry have made significant steps to address the issue of illegal deforestation in their value chains, this is an issue that continues to plague this industry. The actions of a limited few unscrupulous players continues to malign this industry. We must act to put an immediate halt to illegal deforestation in this industry. The proportions of this crisis are becoming so large now that it's almost time to declare a war on illegal deforestation in this industry. This will need better standards, better implementation, and better monitoring, requiring us to join forces across the entire spectrum of stakeholders to address this issue. The second C that I want to talk about today is compliance. We are faced with an unusual situation in the RSPO. We've collectively failed to ensure compliance to our own standards and procedures. I'm sad to report that out of the total number of members who are supposed to submit their annual communication in progress, the ACOPS reports, 16% have not submitted their ACOPS reports for 2 successive years, despite several reminders from the Secretariat. And what is even more embarrassing is that 5% of our members have not submitted their ACOPS reports for 3 successive years. This is just not acceptable. The RSPO is not a club where payment of membership fees entitles people to a seat at the table. Failure to comply will result in appropriate disciplinary action. We must and will act decisively in a fair and transparent manner to drive compliance to our own standards and procedures. The third C is about collaboration. The issues we face today are so big and the targets so challenging that we cannot do it alone. And there's a certain humility and a recognition that we need to invite other people in. When you look at the issues that confront this industry, it is very clear that no single individual, institution, government, or company can provide all the solutions. The challenges require and citizens demand a different approach. There is a need to collaborate across the entire spectrum of stakeholders, involving growers, NGOs, governments, consumer good companies, and academia to seek solutions to these complex problems. None of this is easy. Everything carries a risk. Taking the first step is often the most difficult. It takes courage and a willingness to focus on the long-term horizon and not just on short-term results. We need to work together to address the issues of deforestation, peatland protection, and to create a positive social and economic impact of this industry. There's a need to combine forces to accelerate our journey and not to compete and lose velocity. We need to work together to create a new and sustainable industrial landscape, a new prosperity, and a better future for us all. Ladies and gentlemen, this is our moment. And most important of all, this is our opportunity. There has never been a better time to create a brighter future for all of us, including all of those yet to come. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Sen. And now it is with great pleasure that I invite to stage Mr. Douglas Kress, the official representative of Mr. Achim Steiner, the Executive Director of UNEP, to deliver his speech.
Good morning, and if you think I had a big head before, that is, I've never been so large in my life. Good morning. Good morning, friends and colleagues. Good morning, Chair. Good morning, members of the RSPO executive committees and boards. Good morning, friends and colleagues. I bring you greetings today from United Nations headquarters and from Mr. Achim Steiner, who is the Executive Director of the United Nations Environment Program. My name is Doug Kress. That's what I used to say it. Doug Kress, and I'm the Program Coordinator for the Great Apes Survival Partnership, which is a program inside the United Nations. And it's odd for me at this moment. Normally, I say something like, it's good to see so many familiar faces. It's good to see so many friends from the past. But that's not really true today. Most of you don't know me, and I'm still learning who you are. And that's a shame. The UN, the United Nations, should have been here all along with you. I think the first thing I would do is say, I'm sorry. We're late, but we're catching up. I attended my first RT meeting a year ago in Medan, and at some point someone handed me a microphone, and then I said, I'm sorry, we should be here with you. Because as you just heard in the chair's opening address, you are pioneers. The Roundtable on Sustainable Palm Oil is walking the walk, it is talking the talk, it is doing every single thing that pioneers do. You are leading the charge in sustainable development of an incredibly important commodity. And that's exactly what the United Nations embraces. You're doing exactly what all of the United Nations goals and objectives say you should. And I think you should be certainly applauded for that. I also think you're brave. In the chair's opening address, it's very clear that a large organization, which could be elite, which could be elitist, is not afraid to talk about its own failures. It's not afraid to lay open its shortcomings and to address them. Your principles and criteria change and evolve with the demands of the market. These are all incredibly brave things to do. And you speak about climate change. I come from the United States. We don't even use that word. It doesn't exist yet. But the RSPO is exactly the sort of ally the United Nations has been looking for, and is one that we will certainly work closely with excuse me, going forward. Your growth should be commended. As you've heard, so many new members in the past year. The demand for sustainable certified palm oil is increasing. And the fact that you are an inclusive community, excuse me, inclusive community, one that is growing and one that represents every single step of the supply chain, is also important. Even though we have not been here with you since the start, there is a link between the United Nations and the RSPO. As we've heard earlier, in discussions I've had with Darrell Weber and others, the RSPO came out of the Millennium Development Goals that were established in 2000, an idealistic way forward in terms of creating sustainable development in this new century. And the understanding of those original 8 goals, which were built around issues of education and health and green economies and so forth, it was clear there was not a sustainable development program, a certified program for major commodities, and that's where the RSPO came to life. Again, I wish we had been there in the beginning with you, but if the Millennium Development Goals gave some inspiration to the creation of RSPO, then that was a positive step. And it's moved on. More recently, we've now created the Sustainable Development Goals. And these SDGs, as we call them, and the United Nations loves to create acronyms. So I could stand up here all day and talk about SDGs and MDGs and UNEP and blah, blah, blah. They're real, though. They are real. And the Sustainable Development Goals are one of the reasons that we want to be so much more closely allied with the Roundtable on Sustainable Palm Oil. It was just earlier this year that the draft set of goals was forwarded on to the United Nations General Assembly. And those 17 goals, with 169 targets, are meant to be achievable and measurable, are meant to be inspirational, and they certainly embrace many of the ideals that the Roundtable on Sustainable Palm Oil has. At the core, though, I could list them all out and we could have a long discussion about them, but at the core, you just need to understand 3 principles, and that is that environment and social and economic agendas do not have to be competitive. They do not have to destroy each other. In fact, if you can find a way to bring those 3 agendas together, the mutual benefits are dramatic. And that is certainly something that the Roundtable on Sustainable Palm Oil embodies. You are, as you just heard from the opening address, environment is key. Climate change, illegal deforestation, these are environmental issues. The social agenda, how many indigenous communities, how many smallholders are brought into the Roundtable. And certainly the economic agenda. The potential might of this industry, as you all know, is considerable. But if you bring these issues together, the collective force is awesome indeed. The Great Ape Survival Partnership that I manage inside the United Nations has among one of its priorities the need to promote green economies. And a green economy is certainly what this label right here indicates, what it promotes. You would assume a man who works in the great ape conservation industry would get up here and perhaps rail against this industry to some degree. We see it the other way around. We see opportunity here. This is not the enemy, this is an opportunity. And that's one of the reasons we promoted the Roundtable inside the United Nations. Again, I was only here 1 year ago. My first introduction to Roundtable on Sustainable Palm Oil came in Medan. But we walked away so impressed that we set about trying to bring the United Nations more closely in line with the Roundtable, because we saw benefit not just for great ape issues, not just for orangutans in Southeast Asia and chimpanzees and gorillas and bonobos in Africa, but a broader social, a broader environmental agenda, a broader economic agenda that would benefit all. And that's why we promoted inside the UN and successfully signed a memorandum of understanding this past week with the Roundtable on Sustainable Palm Oil. The United Nations Environment Program and the RSPO are now committed to work together. There are a number of areas we will collaborate. We will use each other's collective networks to leverage greater success. We will certainly do everything we can to foster and promote and drive up the global demand for sustainable palm oil. We will certainly do all we can to ensure that this industry is true to its word, because at its core, the Roundtable is a pioneer, and you are leading the way for so many other industries. If this works, if Roundtable is true to its word, if it is producing certified commodities that find a global market, everybody else will follow. And we at the United Nations are trying to find role models, and that's what you are to us. So in closing, I would simply like to say, first, thank you for the opportunity to address you today. Thank you also for agreeing to partner with the United Nations and agreeing to work with us. And above all, thank you for your honesty, because this is an industry that has laid itself bare and allowed itself to be investigated, allowed itself to be sometimes insulted, but more and more lauded for the work it's doing. I think you should all be very proud of that, and we look forward at the United Nations to going forward with you and promoting sustainable palm oil to an even greater market. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Kress. Mr. Kress, could you kindly remain on stage? I would like to once again invite Mr. Biswaranjan Sen on stage to accompany Mr. Douglas Kress for the certificate presentation ceremony. The WAGS Sabah Lower Kinabatangan Smallholder Group comprises of 36 independent smallholders that produce about 1,000 metric tons of fresh fruit bunches. They attained the RSPO certification on the 30th of October 2012, making them the second group of Malaysian independent smallholders to be certified. Their success is a result of a strong partnership between various stakeholders, which are Nestle, Yayasan Saim Dabi, Solidaridad, and the Wild Asia Group Scheme, or WAGS. Wild Asia were commissioned to bring this smallholder group towards RSPO certification, having previously produced the first group of RSPO certified independent smallholders in Malaysia. I now call upon Ms. Nur Aziza Pibu and Mr. Arbain Kadrun from WAGS Sabah Lower Kinabatangan Group, accompanied by Mr. Dean, Regional Program Coordinator for Wild Asia, to receive the RSPO certification. Next, ladies and gentlemen, we would like to introduce Gapoktan Tanjung Sehati. Located in the Jambi province of Indonesia, they comprise of 214 members with approximately 136,239 hectares of palm oil plantation are operated by independent smallholders. The current annual production of fresh fruit bunches is about 15 metric tons per hectare. Gapoktan Tanjung Sehati started their journey towards RSPO certification in February 2009 and be certified in June 2014, having received much support from the Jambi Provisional Government, Yayasan Setara Jambi, HIVOS, as well as RSPO. With that, I now call upon Bapak Jalal Sayuti, Group Manager of Gapoktan Tanjung Sehati, who led the RSPO certification process, to receive the RSPO certification. Last but not least, Koperasi Usaha Desa Tani Maju is a cooperative of 45 independent smallholders that manages 90 hectares of palm oil plantation and annually produces about 25 tons of fresh fruit bunches per hectare. Located in South Sumatra, their efforts to be RSPO certified started in 2012. Working alongside Cargill, Yongtaro Maros of Cargill's PT Hindoli plantation was appointed as the group manager of Thani Maju to guide them towards achieving the objective, which they successfully achieved in May this year. I now call upon Bapa Rianto, the head of Thani Maju Cooperative, to receive the RSPO certification. Once again, congratulations to all the recipients. And also thank you very much, Mr. Kress. Now I'd like to request Mr. Biswaranjan to accompany Mr. Kress back to his seat as we continue with today's program. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. David Suzuki is an award-winning scientist, environmentalist, and a broadcaster. Dr. Suzuki is a professor emeritus with the Sustainable Development Research Institute at UBC. His television appearances explaining the complexities of the natural sciences in a compelling, easily understood way have received consistently high acclaim for over 30 years. Dr. Suzuki is a recipient of the UNESCO's Kalinga Prize for Science, the United Nations Environmental Programme Medal, and the Global 500. He is a companion to the Order of Canada, the author of 52 books, and has received 26 honorary degrees in Canada, the United States, and Australia. Delivering his keynote address titled Setting the Bottom Line in the Anthropocene, please join me to give a warm welcome to Dr. David Suzuki.
Thank you very much. I'm absolutely honored to be part of your conference and to have the opportunity to share a few ideas with you. I must admit I was astonished when I received the invitation to come to this meeting. And I congratulate you, as did Mr. Kress, on the tremendous work that you're doing now to try to find a path towards a truly sustainable future. I'm not a climatologist, I'm not a forester, I hope I'll be able to provide you some context within which to consider the activity you're going through now. Today I'm not speaking on behalf of any organization, any corporation, or any government. I'm speaking to you as a grandfather and as an elder. I have no hidden agenda, no vested interests. Elders, I believe, have a very special role to play in society. We're no longer driven or tempted by fame or money or power. I know there are a few elders who still do. They need help. There's something wrong. We don't have to worry about losing a job, getting fired, or losing a promotion or a raise. And we don't worry about speaking the truth from our hearts, that we might offend someone. If someone's offended by what I say, that's their problem, not mine. Today, I do want to provide you some context that comes out of my experience in the environmental movement. I speak as an elder with a background as a scientist. We stand at an absolutely unique and critical moment in all of human history. What is or is not done by our species in the next few years will have little effect on my life. I'm at the end of my life. But what is or is not done in the next few years will reverberate through the entire lives of young people today and could very well determine whether our species will survive at the end of the century. Now that's a pretty melodramatic thing to say, that the survival of human beings might be at stake. but many of my respected colleagues are telling us that we have passed too many tipping points to go back, that we are poised on the edge of an abyss, and that the drive for more growth is simply decreasing the probability of a future for our children and our grandchildren. You don't have to believe me. Sir Martin Rees, a distinguished royal astronomer in the United Kingdom, was asked on BBC, what are the chances human beings will be around by the year 2100? And his answer absolutely shocked me. He said 50-50. James Lovelock, the man who invented the concept or the hypothesis of Gaia, has written a book in which he says that over 90% of humankind will be gone by the end of this century. And Clive Hamilton, a very respected eco-philosopher in Australia, wrote a book called Requiem for a Species. And guess what species it's a requiem for? It's for us. You know what the issues are. Human activity has changed the very chemistry of the atmosphere. Climate change is real, and I must say I'm thrilled to come to a conference like this and hear someone speak and use the words climate change, as Doug mentioned. In North America, that's a rare thing today. Thank you for that, for taking it seriously. The prospect of climate change and the implications are really quite monumental. We have interfered with the nitrogen cycle by synthesizing artificial fertilizers spread on fields, ultimately washing into the oceans, causing eutrophication and dead zones in every ocean on the planet. Ocean acidification from increased carbon dioxide in the air, dissolving at the interface with the oceans, creating carbonic acid and acidifying the oceans, as well as our technology to deplete the oceans of the resources that we use, are a very real phenomenon. Deforestation has claimed most of the forests of the planet. Canada, I'm ashamed to say, this year became the greatest destroyer of old-growth forests of any country in the world. Toxic pollution has affected every one of us. Every one of us in this room is carrying dozens of toxic chemicals, ranging from flame retardants to PCBs, dioxin, and pesticides. And of course, the specter of species extinction is beginning to haunt us with every passing year. When I heard that honeybees, for some reason, were vanishing at an astonishing rate, that to me was the most frightening thing I had heard in many a moon. If pollinators disappear from the earth, terrestrial ecosystems will collapse, and there's absolutely no way that human beings could survive with that kind of catastrophe. The fossil records, as you all know, indicate that there have been 5 periods of massive extinction in the past, when up to 95% of all species suddenly disappear from the fossil record. Life does require, from those catastrophic losses of abundance and variety, but it takes about 10 million years for the diversity to recover. 10 million years. I just want to remind you, human beings have been around on the planet for 150,000 years. We are now entering the 6th extinction period, called the Anthropocene extinction, where up 1,000 to 10,000 times the rate of species extinction is going on today. We are the top predator on the planet, and if we believe that we could survive in this mass wave of extinction, I think we don't understand how vulnerable top predators are in the food chain. There have been bottlenecks in the past for human beings, where only a few thousand people survived, but we got through those bottlenecks. A tribute perhaps to our inventiveness and our cleverness, but I don't think we should feel comforted by the fact that humans have survived such bottlenecks in the past, because nature is not as abundant and forgiving as our ancestors found the world. And the technologies that we look to save us from the problems we are creating are themselves driving much of the destructiveness of the planet. We're at a unique moment because extinction today is being driven by one species, us. Which means that our future, along with the rest of nature, is in our hands. And when you think about the political leaders that we've had making big decisions, I don't know whether that makes you feel very comfortable here, but I can tell you, coming from Canada, that doesn't make me feel very happy. Suddenly, in evolutionary history, suddenly in evolutionary and geological time, human beings have become a new kind of force on the planet. There's never been a species quite like us. We are now altering the physical, chemical, and biological properties of the planet on a geological scale. And it's a coming together of a number of factors. The first obvious thing is population. I was born in 1936 when there were just over 2 billion people on the planet. Can you imagine, within the lifetime of a single person, the population has more than tripled. And every new addition to the human population means we need more space, we need more air, we need more water, we need more food, clothing, and shelter. Our ecological footprint is huge. We are now the most numerous mammal on the planet. There are more of us than any species of mouse or rat or rabbit. We are the most numerous mammal. But of course, we're not like rabbits or rats. We have an enormous amount of technology used on our behalf. I look at this room, I am sure there is no one in this room who's got a huge flock of sheep or a cotton field in your backyard, and yet we're wearing woolen and cotton clothing. That comes to us thanks to technology. We are, well, maybe our Australians might have a flock of sheep in their backyard, but most of us don't grow up where we can grow our sheep. You start thinking about the enormous amount of technology used on our behalf to allow us to live as we are. Just to get here, we use telephones and computers and airplanes and cars just to bring me from Vancouver here. All of that technology amplifies our ecological footprint many, many times above what any species has ever had. And that technology takes us to every corner of the planet in search of raw materials to feed our global economy. And ever since World War II, we've been afflicted with an incredible appetite for stuff. In North America, the number one the recreation of teenage girls is shopping. We love to buy stuff. My mother and father survived in the Great Depression, and they taught us when we were growing up, you have to work hard to earn the money to buy the things you need, but you don't run after money and stuff as if having more money makes you a bigger, more important or impressive person. But today, consumption, driven by our appetite for stuff, is amplifying again our ecological footprint. So when you add it all together, our numbers, our technological muscle power, our consumptive demand, and our global economy, we are now a new kind of force. We are a force of nature. And we are, that's why scientists today are calling this the Anthropocene epoch, a period in time when our species has become a geological force. But in the process of being so powerful, we are undermining the very life support systems of the planet. How on earth did we arrive at this moment in time? As I say, I am a scientist by training. I'm a geneticist, and I've been amazed at the way scientists can use DNA to track the movement of our species over time. And all of the trails lead back to Africa 150,000 years ago. That's where our species was born. And try to imagine the Africa of 150,000 years. The plains of Africa must have been filled with animals in abundance and variety beyond anything we could imagine in the Serengeti today. We'd have to look very hard 150,000 years to spot these little clumps of 3, 4, or 5 of these funny-looking furless apes, and that was us. We're not very impressive. There weren't many of us. We weren't very big or fast or strong. We didn't have special sensory ability. You have to wonder how we made our way against the enormous and powerful animals that inhabited the planet with us. Well, of course, our secret was invisible. It was a brain. 2-kilogram organ buried deep in our skulls gave us a huge advantage. That brain, according to Nobel Prize winner François Jacob, has an inbuilt need for order. We don't like it when things happen and we don't understand what's going on. So the human brain has a drive to try to put things together and create order, to understand causal relationships. Why did this happen? What could be the cause? That's a function of the human brain. That brain conferred a massive memory. We remember things. We were curious and we were inventive. And those qualities more than compensated for our lack of physical or sensory ability. And that brain did something no other animal has ever done. It invented an idea called the future. No other animal has a future in the way that we do. But because we invented the idea of a future, we're the only animal that realized we can affect the future by what we do today. Based on what we know, what we've observed in the world around us, we can look ahead. We can see where the dangers are. We can see where the opportunities lie. And we can deliberately choose today to avoid danger and exploit opportunity. I believe foresight was the great advantage that human beings had. And it was that foresight that allowed us to survive over periods of time and got us today where we are the dominant animal on the planet. Today we occupy every continent. We are the major factor affecting the fate of the earth. And we have all of the amplified brain power and predictive ability of scientists and supercomputers. And for over 40 years, the leading scientists of the world have been telling us we are headed down a very dangerous path, that there are opportunities from shifting directions and going a different way. Let me give you an example. One of these is a remarkable document released in November of 1992 called World Scientists' Warning to Humanity. It's signed by 1,700 senior scientists from 71 countries in the world, including over half of all Nobel Prize winners alive in 1992. So it's a pretty a list of prominent scientists. What were they warning us about? Let me read you some of the words from the document. Human beings and the natural world are on a collision course. Human activities inflict harsh and often irreversible damage on the environment and on critical resources. If not checked, many of our current practices put at serious risk the future we wish for human society, and may so alter the living world that it will be unable to sustain life in the manner that we know. Fundamental changes are urgent if we are to avoid the collision our present course will bring about. And then they go on to list the areas of collision: the atmosphere, water resources, oceans, soil, forests, species extinction, and overpopulation. And then the words grow even more bleak. No more than one or a few decades remain before the chance to avert the threats we now confront will be lost, and the prospects for humanity immeasurably diminished. A great change in our stewardship of the earth and life on it is required if vast human misery is to be avoided, and our global home on this planet is not to be irretrievably mutilated. And then they list the 5 urgent things that have to be started immediately. This is a frightening document. Scientists of this stature don't go around signing documents like this very readily. But if this was a frightening document, the response of the media around the world was terrifying. There was no response. How many of you in this room have ever heard of this document? So we have over half of all Nobel Prize winners telling us we could have as little as 10 years to avoid an absolute catastrophe, and this is not something that we pay any attention to. Ladies and gentlemen, that is truly terrifying. We are turning our backs on the very survival mechanism of our species, looking ahead, seeing where the dangers lie, and taking action to avoid the dangers and exploit the opportunities. What on earth has gone wrong? Over billions of years, this planet has undergone huge changes. The sun is 30% warmer than it was 4 billion years ago when life arose. Poles, north and south poles, have reversed and re-reversed. Ice ages have come, filled with warm periods in between ice ages, warm periods. Oceans have filled and emptied, mountains have risen up and worn down, and all that while, life has survived and flourished. And what has been the secret of life's resilience over these huge changes? And the astonishing answer is diversity. I was a graduate student in the United States in the late 1950s when geneticists discovered that at the level of a species, there was a huge amount of genetic diversity for each gene that you looked at. It's called genetic polymorphism. We thought as species became specialized, they would become more and more homogeneous. And instead, we found exactly the opposite, that species that thrive have an inbuilt level of diversity or heterogeneity. And it, like Russian dolls that pack one on top of another, it turns out diversity within diversity within diversity is part of life's resilience. At the ecosystem level, the greater species diversity exists, the more resilient that ecosystem is. And around the Earth, from the Arctic areas, the tundra areas, to steaming forests in the tropics, life exists because of enormous diversity of ecosystems. So we've got diversity within diversity within diversity, which confers resilience because as conditions around the world change, we have a pool to draw from those that might be better genes or better species adapted to the new conditions. And that is something I think should be applied in the way that humans act. Diversity should be built into whatever we do in our interaction with the planet to sustain that diversity. Monoculture. You all know what a monoculture is, spreading a single strain, a single species over large areas. It renders any group extremely vulnerable as change happens. Vulnerable to conditions of the climate, vulnerable to new pests or infections or disease. Monoculture is a very, very great threat to the long-term resilience and survival of life. For 95% of human existence, we were nomadic hunter-gatherers. We had to carry everything we owned on our backs. And when you're a nomadic hunter-gatherer, you know very well that nature, you are utterly dependent on nature for your survival and your well-being. And the remarkable thing is when you look at the history of our species as we moved out of Africa across the globe, you can practically describe where humans were by the extinction that goes on as we spread across the planet. Even though we were armed only with clubs and spears and stone axes, our brains enabled us to exploit the big, slow-moving mammals. Humans are thought to have extinguished woolly mammoths. Man, think how long a village could live on one single mammoth. We extinguished saber-toothed tigers and giant sloths. The movement of humans across the planet, even with simple tools, was accompanied by a wave of extinction. And what that meant was, as people moved into new areas and began to deplete the easily obtained animals and plants, they had to go, oh my God, this is not sustainable. Like, we're running out of stuff we need. And they either had to find ways of living in greater balance with what was available, or they moved on. And what I believe is that indigenous knowledge, which is based on place, indigenous knowledge is the accumulation of hard-won experience. Through practical experience and mistakes, people learned how to live and accumulated this knowledge over long periods of time. Indigenous knowledge is priceless knowledge of place and how we live within that place. And that indigenous knowledge, the body of knowledge accumulated and handed down over dozens and dozens of generations, is priceless because it will never be duplicated by science. This is hard-won, real knowledge gained from having to rely on your information to survive from year to year. Today, the loss of indigenous knowledge is, I believe, a huge loss for all of humankind because so much of what was known was about sustainability. We are going through a loss of language around the world that, if it was translated into the rate of loss of animal species, would be considered absolutely terrifying and catastrophic. Indigenous knowledge then makes up a part of what Wade Davis, the anthropologist, calls the ethnosphere. We have genetic, species, and ecosystem diversity within the biosphere that has enabled life to survive and flourish. But the ethnosphere is the sum total of human culture and human knowledge. And it has been diversity within the ethnosphere that has enabled human beings to survive in so many different ecosystems around the planet. And now we are being monocultured around the planet with a single notion of progress and development. And this, again, makes us, I believe, extremely vulnerable. 10,000 years ago marked a huge shift in the way that we live. The agricultural revolution now provided us with the opportunity for a reliable source of food year-round. Now we could actually build permanent structures and ultimately villages. It signaled a fundamental change in the way that human beings lived. And we have been farmers for most of that 10,000-year period. In 1900, when there were 2 billion people in the world, there were only 14 cities with more than 1 million people. London was the largest with 6.5 million people. Tokyo was the 7th largest city with 1.5 million people. The vast majority of people around the world lived in rural village communities because we were farmers. Most of humanity was involved in some aspect of farming. And farmers know very well that weather and climate utterly critical in our survival and well-being. Farmers know you need pollination in flowering plants, most of it by insects. Farmers know that certain plants will take nitrogen from the air and fix it as fertilizer in the soil. In Canada, farmers know the amount of snow in the winter is directly related to the amount of moisture in the soil in the summer. Farmers understand we are embedded in and dependent on nature for our survival and well-being. But then, from 1900, we went through an amazing change. In only 100 years, by the year 2000, we had shifted. The world population tripled to tripled to 6 billion people by the year 2000. But now there were more than 400 cities with more than 1 million people. The 10 largest cities in the year 2000 all had more than 11 million people. Tokyo was the largest, 26 million people. Can you imagine? Tokyo went from 1.5 million to 26 million in 100 years. Now, with apologies to any Japanese in this room, if you've ever been to Tokyo, you know humans shouldn't have to live that way. That's not how we evolved to live. But in 100 years, we have been transformed from a rural village farming animal to a big city dweller. And in a big city, it's possible to spend days, if not weeks, never going outside. One of my best friends in Toronto, the largest city in Canada, lives in a high-rise apartment building, completely air-conditioned. He goes down the elevator into the basement, gets into his air-conditioned car, drives down the freeway into the basement of an air-conditioned commercial building, up into his air-conditioned office. That building is connected through tunnels to all kinds of shopping areas. And he told me, David, I don't go outside for weeks. So in a city, our perception of the world around changes. Who needs nature? My most important priority is my job. I need a job to earn the money to buy the things I want. And so then the economy comes to be our highest priority, to such an extent that the Prime Minister of Canada, a country, the industrialized country that is most vulnerable to the consequences of climate change, who spent 5 days in the Arctic recently and never once said the words climate change, that the Prime Minister of Canada said, we can't do anything about greenhouse gas emissions, it'll destroy the economy. And so he has elevated the economy above the very atmosphere that keeps us alive. That's because we now feel we no longer are connected to the real world, that the economy is what matters most. Thank you, by the way, to the earlier people for giving me an extra 15 minutes. I really appreciate that because I've used up my half hour. Thank you. I know you're clapping for them. I hope you're clapping for me because I got 15 more minutes of speech to tell you. And I want to use the last part of my time by just telling you stories of my experiences. About 20 years ago, British Columbia, where I live, was involved in big battles over logging. And so I decided to do a 2-hour special about forestry practices in Canada and around the world. And I arranged with one of the big companies in British Columbia, Macmillan Bloedel, to interview 3 loggers on Vancouver Island. And so we drove up in the morning in a van, and as we were taking our gear out, 3 big loggers came out of the woods. They knew that they were going to be interviewed. And as they approached us, they were saying, you so-and-so environmentalists, you're destroying our jobs. And I was fighting back and yelling at them. And of course, it's great television. But at the end of our interview, I said, you know, I don't know a single environmentalist that's against logging. We all use paper. We love to work with wood and timber. We just want to be sure that your children and grandchildren will be able to log forests as rich as the ones you're cutting down now. And right away, one of the loggers said, no way I'd take my kids into the forest to log. There won't be any trees left. So they're not stupid. They knew what they were doing was not sustainable. But loggers were concerned with putting food on the plate every day, with paying for their car, or paying their monthly mortgage payments. And whereas environmentalists were talking about the forest as an ecosystem, about maintaining that ecosystem indefinitely by logging the proper way. And that was an important lesson to me. What's the point of yelling at each other if we're not even talking about the same things? It didn't make any sense. A few years after that, I was asked by the Lytton Indian Band, the indigenous people, if I would help them fight to stop logging in a valley they considered theirs and sacred, called the Stein Valley. The British Columbia government had given a New Zealand forest company called Fletcher Challenge a license to log the Stein Valley. And the Lytton people said, we don't want it to happen. So I said, okay, I'll help you, but I wanted to take my family camping to see what it's like. And we went for 5 days and camped in the forest, and it was truly a magnificent forest. And as we came out to the trailhead, we met a party of people, and the women were in dresses and high heels, and the men were in suits and ties, so we knew they weren't campers. But, you know, when you're on a trail, you talk to anybody, and so we started to talk, and very quickly I realized, holy cow, this is the CEO of Fletcher Challenge, the company that's going to log the forest. And very quickly he realized, oh my goodness, this is that shit disturber, David Suzuki. So needless to say, we rather quickly got into a shouting match. And finally, in frustration, he said, listen, Suzuki, are tree huggers like you willing to pay for those trees? Because if you're not willing to pay for them, they don't have any value till someone cuts them down. And that for me was a very important experience, because I realized that as long as we were arguing within an economic frame, then he could tell me how many cubic meters of pulp there was, how many board feet of lumber there was there, how many jobs, how much profit. He could tell me all of that coming out of the forest. And me, as an environmentalist, what would I say? Well, we could pick some berries and sell them. Maybe we could get some salal bushes and do flower arrangement, and maybe we'll find a cure for cancer. But the real reason we are fighting for the forest had nothing to do with that. The forest as an entity was taking carbon out of the atmosphere, putting oxygen back in it. Not a bad service for an animal like us. If they weren't doing it, we wouldn't be here. And yet, what do economists say? That's an externality. That's not relevant to our economic system. So what's going on here? We can't include the things like the forest roots are holding the soil, so when it rains, the soil doesn't run in and spoil the spawning beds for salmon, or that the forest is pumping millions of gallons of water into the air and affecting weather and climate, that the forest provides habitat for countless species of plants and animals. None of that is in the economic equation. They're considered irrelevant. So what kind of a discussion is it then when I have to argue with the CEO of a forest company and both of my hands are tied behind my back because we can't talk about the real things that matter from an ecological standpoint? I don't want to fight anymore because many of the battles, and I've been involved in the environmental movement since 1962, when Rachel Carson published Silent Spring, all about the unexpected effects of pesticides. And because of her, the environmental movement was born, and Greenpeace, I don't know if where's our Greenpeace man here, was born in Vancouver, Canada, my hometown. I'm proud to say because of Rachel Carson and then the American plans to test nuclear weapons in Amchitka. But over the years since I've been involved in the environmental movement, we've won many, many battles. We stopped dams, we stopped clear-cut logging, we stopped drilling for oil in extreme places, we protected species of animals. But 30, 35 years later, guess what? We're fighting exactly the same battles again. And so for years now, I've been saying environmentalists have failed. We fundamentally failed to shift the frame. So it's like we're still back there with Fletcher Challenge and the CEO arguing about the forest within the frame set by economics. We have to change the way that we look at the world. So a couple of years ago, as you know, I hope you know, one of the major areas of battle going on in Canada today is in the province of Alberta, where the tar sands are now the biggest development on the planet. And this is the dirtiest oil that you can get anywhere on earth. A couple of years ago, I got a phone call from the CEO of one of the largest companies in the tar sands. He said, "Can I come down and see you?" I said, "Sure, great, come on down." Next day, he came to Vancouver. And I met him at the door and I said, "I am so happy and honored that you came. Thank you for taking time to come. But before you come in this door, I want you to leave your identity as a CEO of an oil company outside. I want you to come in this door as a human being, because I'm not interested in negotiating or fighting. I want to see, what do we agree? What do we agree are the fundamental needs that have to be protected and served for all human beings on earth? Then we can build areas where we can say, how do we create an economy? How do we live together? How do we find jobs? But unless we have a fundamental base of agreement, I am not interested in that conversation. Well, needless to say, he felt very, very uncomfortable because he had come as a CEO of a company and he wanted to negotiate. So he came into the room, reluctantly, I think, and I said, "Mr. CEO, please believe me, there is nothing bad. I'm not accusing you of anything. What do you think is the most important need we all have as human beings?" Well, I could see his brain was on Wall Street and stock investments. And I said, "You know, if you don't have air for 3 minutes, you're dead. If you have to breathe polluted air all the time, you're sick. Can you not agree with me that clean air has got to be the highest priority of any civilization, of any group of human beings on earth? I said, if you don't have water for 3 days, you're dead. If you have to drink polluted water, you're sick. Can we not put clean water up there? When I arrived at the airport yesterday in KL, I was met by a car, and the first thing that the driver handed me was a glass bottle of water. I was pleased to see that. But the glass bottle, now I'm trying to remember, I then looked at the label. That water came from, what the hell, the hotel room has all these same glass bottles. And where does it come from? It comes from Europe somewhere. Huh? No, it's not Evian, it's a different one. I think it comes from Italy or somewhere. What the hell? Do you mean in Malaysia you've got to import water from halfway around? That should be criminal. Canada has more fresh water per capita than any other country on the planet. And yet we buy Evian water, we buy water from Fiji, we pay more than we pay for gasoline. And in Canada, every day there are at least 1,000 boil water alerts. You can't drink the water out of the tap because it's dangerous. What is going on? Clean water should be our highest priority. And then if you go without food for 3 to 6 weeks, you're dead. If you have to eat contaminated food, you're sick. So can we put food and soil up as the highest priority? And every bit of the energy that we have in our bodies that we need to move, grow, and reproduce, all of that energy is sunlight captured by plants in photosynthesis. We then get it converted into chemical energy by eating the plants or the animals that eat the plants. So shouldn't we put photosynthetic activity up there as the highest priority? And what is it that gives us clean air, clean water, clean soil and food, and clean energy? Guess what? It's biodiversity. It is life, the web of life on earth that cleanses, replenishes, creates what Aboriginal people call the 4 sacred elements: earth, air, fire, and water. And I said, Mr. CEO, can you agree with indigenous people around the world? These are the most sacred elements that keep us alive and healthy. Those should be the foundation of how we live on this world. And then, whether you're in oil palm or whether you're in fossil fuel oil, whatever it is, we've got to make sure that how we do it does not in any way undermine the very foundations of our lives in society. Well, I regret to say that he couldn't agree with me. At least he didn't. And he left, he wasn't mad, he was very unhappy. And I never heard from him again. But I feel that this is the nub of where the discussion has got to be. When I told my secretary I was coming to KL to speak to oil palm, the oil palm industry, she said, why? First of all, you don't know a damn thing about oil palm. And why would you want to talk to them? I said, everybody has got to see the world through the lenses of environmentalism. And this is a very important group that's got to see. And I'm coming here to ask you, is there anyone here that says, Suzuki, you're full of baloney? Air, water, soil, biodiversity, these are not the fundamental things that we need. However we make a living, however we live, those have got to be protected above anything else because they keep the planet healthy for an animal like us. What I did also say to Mr. CEO that he felt very, very unhappy with was that we live in a world that is shaped and constrained by laws of nature. In physics, we know you can't build a rocket that will move faster than the speed of light. We know that. And only science fiction writers think we can go faster than that. In the real world, we know the speed of light is a limit. We know the law of gravity says you can't build an anti-gravity machine here on Earth. We know the first and second laws of thermodynamics tell us we can't have a perpetual motion machine. Those are laws of physics, and we live within the laws set by physics. In chemistry, it's the same. Chemistry tells us the properties of the elements, that informs us which elements we can chemically react together and which we can't. We know there are laws governing rates of reaction and diffusion constants. All of that is what limits what we can do in chemistry, and we know that, and we live within it. And biology is the same. We are animals. As animals, that we are subject to the same constraints of the laws of biology as any other animal. I was giving a talk in Austin, Texas at the first Green Building Conference years ago, and a woman came up. She was infuriated at me because I had said to the children in the class, now the most important thing to remember is we are animals. She was angry. Don't call my daughter an animal, we're human beings. So I gave her the same response Paul Ehrlich gave. Oh, are you a plant? We are animals, and as animals, we're subject to the same laws that constrain carrying capacity of ecosystems. Now, we're not like most animals or plants. We're not limited to ecosystems. Our brains enable us to exploit very different ecosystems around the world, but we still live within the biosphere, the zone of air, water, and land where all life exists. And the biosphere dictates the carrying capacity of our species. We are way past the capacity of the biosphere to support us at this population consuming as we do. Don't get mad at me. That's just, there are constraints. You might say, well, how can we continue to live this way right now? Yeah, we do it by using up the rightful legacy of our children and grandchildren now, all in the name of continued economic growth and progress. I don't think it's progress to use up what rightfully belongs to our children and grandchildren and their grandchildren as far as we can see into the future. So I said to him, there and then as animals, we have an absolute need for clean air, clean water, clean soil, clean energy, biodiversity. I said, Mr. CEO, those are laws of nature that we have to live with. There are other things, though, that are not laws of nature. We draw lines around our cities, our provinces, our countries. And boy, do we take those boundaries seriously. We will go to war, we will kill and die to protect those boundaries. But you know what? Nature couldn't care less about human borders. I mean, you talk to the monarch butterflies that go from Canada through the United States to Mexico. What country do they belong to? Salmon that are born in British Columbia waters go through Alaska, up along the Alaskan coast, around Russia and Japan. Who do they belong to? They don't care about human borders, and yet we take them so seriously. Then we create other things, capitalism, the economy, markets, corporations. These are not forces of nature, for God's sakes. We invented them. And yet we treat them as if they are somehow God-given forces of nature. Just read the Wall Street Journal from day to day. You would believe the market, my God, we've got to free the market, let the market. Wait a minute, we invented it. We can't change the laws of nature, but we can sure as hell change the things that we invented. And we've got to change them so they conform to the laws that are set by the natural world. That's the challenge we have today. And let me end on just two things. I think that the shift in the way that we look at the world is critical because it affects everything we do to that world. So there are some of us who believe that a forest is a sacred grove, but other people look on it as timber and pulp. Some of us believe that a river is the circulatory system of the land, and others see irrigation and power. Is the soil a community of organisms or just dirt? Is a house our home or just real estate? Is another species our biological kin or an opportunity or a resource? Is the earth our mother or a mother lode? We've got to change the way we're seeing it now. because it's only when we have a balance between those ways of seeing the world around that we may treat our mother in a radically different way. So let me end by telling you a story about the most important person in my life, who was my father. He was my great teacher and mentor. And in 1994, when he was 85, he was dying, and I moved in to care for him the last months of his life. And that was one of the most wonderful periods I spent with my father. He was not in pain. He was not afraid of dying. He was fully prepared to die. And we spent hours talking and laughing and crying. And he kept saying, "David, I die a rich man." And I never understood that, because my father, my wife and I had been subsidizing my father and my mother for many, many years. How could he say he was a rich man? But in all the time we were together, he never once said, "Hey, David, do you remember that closet full of fancy clothes I had?" He never said, "Remember that big car I bought in 1985, or the house we owned in London, Ontario?" That's just stuff. All we talked about were family, neighbors, and friends, and the things we did together. That was my father's wealth. And in those things, he was truly a rich man. We've got focused on one of the weirdest things when we think that stuff and money is what makes us happy and better off. We better rethink that. An exercise that's really worth going through. Try to imagine when you're on your deathbed and what you want to be remembered for and what you will be proudest of as you leave this earth. Thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Suzuki. Once again, thank you very, very much, Dr. Suzuki. Ladies and gentlemen, we will now take a short break, and I'd like to invite everybody to the foyer for some light refreshments. And we will commence the next part of today's program at 11. So once again, ladies and gentlemen, please do proceed to the foyer for some light refreshments. And also for those who have the SRS, or rather the translation system, please to kindly return it back to the table at the back of the ballroom, and you may have it again in our next session. Thank you.